Okay, great. Hello, everybody. My name's Justine, and I'm with Lexington. We're a design research firm in Columbus, Ohio, in the U.S. We focus on design research and providing services to our clients from the fuzzy front end all the way to the evaluating potential concepts that they might want to put out into the market. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about one of our offerings, which is called Insight Translation. And it's basically taking research findings and making them useful and usable for the people who need it. So why do we do Insight Translation? Well, basically, so I've worked with a lot of designers. I'm a designer myself, and over the course of my career, we've kind of discovered that a lot of research is almost unusable, and people sometimes are doing research just to do research. And you need to be able to use a research document as effectively as possible, and that means you need to be able to communicate to the people who are going to be using it. A lot of times in our cases, we're trying to communicate to designers, and Insight Translation now is going to bridge the gap between researchers and designers or developers. So speaking of the fact that research sometimes isn't usable, well, no one can use a 100-page report. I mean, it's you dump this thing on somebody's desk, and they've asked for it, and they say, great, thanks, and they might peruse it a little bit, but does it ever get pulled out again? Does it ever get used again? And that's one of the things that Insight Translation strives to avoid. Part of the way that we do this is by taking information, mass amounts of information, in fact, and kind of putting them into visual models, as an example, that we have here. You can see it's very sticky, and it becomes more memorable when it's visual. Visual things can stick into people's minds better, and because of it's sticky and because it's memorable, it can be more efficient. It can be used over and over again. And it's not something that gets put in the drawer and never looked at again. So to kind of give you some context of where Insight Translation happens in the design development process, the intention of it is to communicate design criteria. So in the research phase, we go and kind of understand what the problem is. We build a methodology or our approach. We go out and do the research, get the information from the user. We analyze our findings. We develop insights, whether through synthesis or collaborative workshops or whatever that might be. And then at this point, once we have our insights, we go into the Insight Translation phase, where we figure out what the best way to communicate this design criteria is going to be, depending on the audience, and especially if the audience is going to be design. Sorry about that lag there. So as I mentioned, with the models, we are using visual skills and concrete thinking to embody abstract ideas. So we're taking the mass amounts of information and kind of culling them down and making them digestible in a visual and very engaging and inspirational way. And the point of Insight Translation, even though it is next to the design phase, is to kind of define the problem rather than to solve the problem. So whereas design and development is solving the problem, we're creating a framework that focuses creativity and a usable tool to focus that creativity. We've structured an insight. So there are 4 pieces that we've discovered that can create an insight. So back to the process again, an insight is the step that comes before the Insight Translation phase. So we figured out what this important information is that we do need to communicate to designers or developers or marketers or technologists. And within this insight, we see 4 different types of information. There are emotions, there are benefits, there are features, and there are attributes. And this range goes from all the way from the emotional end, so very user wants and desires and what they hate and what they love, all the way down to features and attributes of a potential product or service that are very sensory and very product and very category based. And these things tend to be more inspirational and useful for technologists, engineers, and designers, but on the other end, you still need to know the why. What are the emotions, the benefits that are driving those features and attributes? So on this particular page, we do have an example kind of walking you through what emotions look like in a visual explanation of it. This example is for a residential or in-home thermostat, and the kind of top portion of it is leading you through the emotional experience that consumers ideally want to have when interacting with their thermostat. And then opposing that on the bottom is kind of the gray circles going down. This is the current experience. So this is what they're currently emotionally experiencing with their thermostat in home. So you can get a really quick snapshot of what this emotional experience is around this contextual experience. And the benefits associated with that are very category specific. So we start looking at what kind of benefits this thermostat could provide, and looking at comfortable and energy efficient. You can see it's kind of easy to use and durable, accessible, smart, informative. Again, all presented in a visual, easy to digest way. And then beyond that, you can take benefits into the feature level and attribute level, where, excuse me, where it starts showing how these things can be communicated and how they can be signals for the consumer in these benefits. So you can see up at the top for my style, that may have been one of the requirements of the consumers that came out. And so what does my style mean? Well, we can provide visual objects and visual cues and even other sensory cues as well, sounds, textures, anything, to kind of explain how to execute and inspire designers for executing the benefits, which then would lead the consumer into the ideal emotion. So really the key benefits of Insight Translation are it really builds alignment within an organization. So if you have all that information ranging from emotions all the way down to features and attributes of a product or service, everybody's talking on the same page. You've got information that's all based in the end user or in the consumer, and it all speaks to, every portion of that can speak to everybody within an organization. So you have this institutional knowledge, and because it is presented in a visual way, and it's a tool that's been designed for use across multiple disciplines, you have inspiration that inspire everybody to work together. So this example is going to show how we've used Insight Translation principles to describe the personalities or the differences between 4 mobile phone carriers. This was done for a client who really wanted to tailor their phone offering to particular carriers, streamlining their own process of which models they offer to which carriers. So as you can see from the data, we kind of came up with these tough experience components. So this is kind of the base level of what Sprint or Nextel phone carrier is, and giving you kind of a very verbal description of who they are and what their personality is. We wanted to add to this, and we wanted to build it out to make it really speak well to what this carrier is all about to the consumer. So we put in a quote from the consumer. It's about getting the job done well, and specifically paying attention to the word job, this very kind of blue-collar group. So the words are very specifically chosen to express the personality of this particular one. Then we decided we might want to add on kind of a celebrity personality to give it even more life. So as we're building through this, we're bringing this more and more to life so that it really shouts at you what the essence of Sprint Nextel personality is. Now, if you're doing international work, doing celebrities can get a little bit tricky, may not be recognizable all across the world. So we just have to pay attention to things like that. Fortunately, this was just for the U.S. market. So Clint Eastwood was very highly recognizable to everybody. The next thing we did was added a few kind of metaphors or examples that might start to begin to express the visual language of Sprint Nextel. So, and in addition to providing the actual objects, you see the truck, a watch, and a phone, we put those objects into a little story over on the right that kind of gives you the context of why these things are expressing it. So you can see the watch feels more refined, established, and professional. And then in addition to that, to build out the design language even further, we added a few more objects that really visually and textually express what the Sprint Nextel personality is. So doing this for all the consumers, then we ended up with basically these 4 kind of similarly structured yet incredibly different personalities for each of these carriers. T-Mobile here, and then Verizon, and lastly we have AT&T. So you can see the huge difference between the two, and this helped our client determine which models needed to be delivered or could be provided to or would be most likely to be selected by the phone carriers. And you can also begin to compare them as well. You can start looking at how they relate to each other and where overlaps might be for efficiencies and streamlining of model delivery. So the key principles behind insight translation, there's just 4 of them, and they're pretty easy to grasp. We've got, it needs to be actionable, it needs to be meaningful, it needs to be aspirational and inspirational. So we'll quickly go through each of those. Actionable meaning it needs to be simple, concrete, sensory, and cognitive. It needs to be easy to grasp, and it needs to be easy to relate to the job at hand. So the example here, we have kind of an explanation for a particular shopper type or a particular consumer type called functional clean, and this was about their shampoo use. And if you look into the details, there is information about the goo that's inside the shampoo, there's information about the bottle that holds the goo, and there's information about how the hair should be after the shampoo is used. So it's very actionable. The next example we have here is it needs to be meaningful, and the best way to do this that we found in our experience is to directly tie the information to the data. So as you can see here, we've got the attributes that came out, style attributes were connected to these benefits. So smart, modern, durable, and how the actual physical objects really tied into what those benefits were. In this particular project, it was a multi-sensory collage that the participants created. So they actually used these physical objects that you see here to build their ideal product and talked about them. So they talked about each one and what each one meant, and by that you make connections between the two. So you can see, for example, in the upper left there's a square, and you can see how that connects to easy to use as well as to durable. And those, that link, that line in between the two, can be directly linked back to transcripts, notes, or worksheets that were filled out by the consumer. The third principle being aspirational. It's very important that the criteria or the story or whatever it is that's given to our client that's meant to be inspirational for design is aspirational. So it should describe the future. It should provide an ideal experience. So it gives them something to shoot for. What you see here is kind of a storyboard at the bottom, walking through a consumer through her day with this ideal product that she might have. And it shows ideally how it might happen. It's not meant to say that the product should necessarily be designed this way, but it is an expression of what the ideal is. And lastly, we have inspirational. So it should be descriptive, definitely not prescriptive. Everything in here is meant to guide. It's never meant to tell what to do. You're looking at pictures and objects and all kinds of things that can represent as metaphors for what a way to execute or a way to stimulate thinking about how to execute a design. So we'll quickly go through one more example here. We've got what is an ideal rugged phone. cell phone. So our client came to us and wanted to know, what does it mean to have a rugged phone, and what does that look like? So again, we went out with a multi-sensory kit. We had consumers build their ideal rugged phone using all different kinds of objects, images, words, and collaged it out. And based on what all of the consumers did, we then looked at which things were picked the most often. So you can start to see how one object may have been picked 54% by 54% of the consumers, and they all picked it for the very same reason, being that it was portable. Another one that they picked it 98% of the time because it was waterproof. So then we took all of these kind of benefits or features or attributes and put them all together to kind of tell a story. So one particular feature might be that it's shock resistant or proof. And some of the attributes that can communicate that are that it's coated. Might have some rubber on it. It's rounded. It may have a recessed screen. It's made of metal. And again, this is descriptive, not prescriptive. It's not meant to say it needs to be made of rubber, but here's why it needs to be. And again, we want to be able to tell the entire story of the whole phone. So you just saw shockproof, and now you can see how shockproof connects to a bunch of other features and benefits that tell the whole story of what this phone should be like with the attributes associated with it. So out of that came, basically we ended up discovering 4 different styles for rugged phones. The people that we talked to ended up in one of these 4 camps, and it ended up being 4 distinct ways that you can communicate a rugged cell phone. The first one being this industrial rugged style, and again you can see we visually have expressions of what this means, and you can really get a sense for the personality differences between these 4. Once we get, here's the high-tech rugged style, so you can start seeing a lot more silver, it's a lot sleeker. And companion to this, there are a lot of explanations as well, verbal explanations and details that technologists or technicians or developers can go into more. Here's the athletic rugged style, the introduction of a little bit of color here, a little bit more rubber. And lastly, which was a surprise for us and for the client, was the feminine rugged style. And within each of these kind of groupings of objects here, there are objects that were included in the set that the consumers used. But in addition to that, we used what they said and the way they described them to provide more and better examples of objects that kind of represent the feminine rugged style. So just to wrap up, there are 4 basic principles that kind of talk about the importance and why and what insight translation needs to be. Actionable, so it needs to be sensory, it needs to be concrete, it needs to be something somebody can work with, it needs to connect to their job and connect to what they're supposed to be doing. The shampoo example, we talked about the goo, the bottle, and how the hair should feel. It needs to be meaningful, so it needs to tie to the data. This is incredibly important, especially when we were talking about the alignment. To get everybody on the same page, everybody has to buy into the information in the first place. And the best way to get people to buy into information is to tie it to the data. You can always go back to the data and say the consumers said this. Third, aspirational. It should always represent the future. It's a goal. It's something to shoot for. And inspirational. It should definitely be descriptive and not prescriptive. It's not meant to tell designers, engineers, or developers what to do. It's to be able to give them a framework to work within. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time listening, and we can take some questions now if you have any.